seminar that we are organizing here at the Commission's office in Stockholm, and the European Parliament office in Stockholm. Johan Kuylenstierna, the Director General of the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. We organized this seminar because we have two prominent guests with us here today. We have many prominent guests here, but two extra prominent international guests. Leena Ylä-Mononen, who is the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency, and we will present, or you will present, the State of Europe's Environment 2025. And we have also Cyril Ritter here, Deputy Head of a Unit at the European Commission, DG Environment, and you will present the Environmental Implementation Review. We will have a panel discussion also after the presentation, after the coffee break. We have a lot of prominent guests there as well. I will introduce you later. I will only have also two practical questions. This seminar is live streamed, so you will be on air all the time, as just you know. And also, because we are inside a building, please note where the emergency exits are located in the back of the room if something should happen here. But someone who knows much more about this office and this house is Annika Wepring-Korzinek. Please, maybe you should also welcome us here.
Yes, I will be happy to. Thank you very much, Johan, and very happy to see you all here. Welcome to the Europahuset, a European house, a House of Europe, the European Commission's representation in Sweden, together with the European Parliament's office here in Sweden. And Johan said here that maybe I should say a few words of who we are here, since some of you are usual suspects, I was going to say, who come to our seminars regularly, and some are not. But we, as a representation, we are here to represent the European Commission in the member state. And there is one of these representations in every member state. And our main task is to communicate about the EU. So we try to communicate to anyone who wants to listen, everything from schools to companies to administration to agencies. We try to talk to everybody who wants to listen. But of course, also very much with media and press, and try to reach the multipliers in the society. We also work a lot with, I see many of you here, stakeholders, so representatives from different industry organizations, trade unions, etc., NGOs. But we're very, very happy to be able to co-organize this together with the Environment Protection Agency, and also very happy to see that the European Environment Agency is here, and a colleague from the European Commission itself, I was going to say, from headquarters. It's always very nice, because otherwise it's me who has to stand here and speak on issues that I might not always be an expert on, but now we have the absolute expert with us. And I think this will be a super interesting and efficient seminar, because we will go through everything. I mean, we will have the privilege to learn about the state of the environment 2025 from the EEA, and also about implementation of environmental legislation, particularly in Sweden, and then also the Swedish perspective on this implementation. So I think you get the full picture in a very short afternoon. So I think I'm really myself is very much looking forward to hearing all this information, and to also have, I think there will be a possibility also to ask questions from the audience. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika, and thank you for hosting us here in central Stockholm as well. So, Europe's Environment 2025, of course, an important report about every 5 years. Coming at a time, really when environmental issues, of course, are also a lot under stress in itself. It's not just the environment that is under stress, but also environmental issues is under stress. We have to really look how our issues, our mandate, can be connected to many of the European challenges that we are talking about daily: competitiveness, security, natural resources, etc. Europe's Environment, I think, picks this up really in a very nice way. So, Leena, we are looking forward to have a presentation of the report, and of course also how you place this report really now in the changing agenda of Europe in the world. So please, a warm applause to Leena Ylä-Mononen.
Tack. I hope you hear me well. Yes. Good afternoon. God eftermiddag, borde kanske säga här i Sverige. But this is an English-speaking event, which I'm really relieved about, because I mean, yes, my school Swedish is now very much blended with Danish, some sort of, and it's really getting bad. So, really happy to be here today. Before I start really about the report, maybe I share some information about what is European Environment Agency, so that some of you who may not know it well may also appreciate that we are more than an agency. We are one of the many EU agencies. I think there are more than 50 nowadays already. We have been 30 years plus already situated in Copenhagen, in Denmark, and we are working very closely with our network of member countries, including, of course, Sweden. So it is indeed also very much a networking organization. At the moment, we have already 38 countries, 32 so-called member countries, and then 6 Western Balkan states, which are in the status of cooperating countries. And now we are, of course, looking forward to potentially have also Moldova, and now also Ukraine has expressed interest to join our cooperating country network. But we have really a great network of institutions in all these countries and experts. You can see the numbers here. And we are organized in groups and topic centers. And what we do is to collect data from the member countries, either via the formal reports under legislation or through our other systems. We collect, analyze, and then produce knowledge products out of it. And Europe's Environment, this 5-year report, is one of those really synthesizing, overarching reports that we do. And of course, our role is to support both the EU policy and decision making, but also to help countries in their national policy development. So that was briefly about our agency. But this report, and we created this visualization of the report, and take a look at this, because it aims to illustrate really how we have a positive future within our reach if we take the right decisions. It shows how human beings, people could be really thriving together with nature and environment. Showing also how nature is central to everything that we appreciate, human security and prosperity included. But also really how foundational it is to our human lives and societies. So I'm very proud to present the report here today. We have been doing this kind of country outreaches and publications also recently after our launch in end of September in Brussels. But I have to say that this is really a result of the hundreds of experts in the countries, including those in Sweden, and I'm really, really grateful for that expert support. It is the most comprehensive scientific assessment available today of the current state and outlook of our continent's environment and climate. And of course, the key message of the report is that outlook is not good. We are not on track to meet the maturity of our targets. We will feel more environmental, especially climate impacts across our continent. And hence the urgency cannot be overstated. But the report also shows where we have made really strides forward. And it gives concrete examples of success that should inspire us all to do more. Let me first take a moment to go back in time. So these 5-year reports, we indeed have been published ever since we were established in 1990, or started in Copenhagen in 1994. And we have then, ever since, every 5 years, together with our member countries, published these reports. And of course, one can say that much has changed during these years and decades. Climate, environment and sustainability as topics are now very well established in the political and public debate. And this is in itself extremely positive. But also the fact remains that we face existential challenges, and they are now more urgent than ever. This year's report is a bit different than before. It is divided in 3 parts, so-called main report, which is 200 plus minus pages, PDF only, so no more printed reports. Then we have so-called thematic briefings. So really looking per theme through different, let's say, data and analysis, past trends, future outlook, and progress towards policy targets for key environmental topics. And then third, country profiles, which I will come back briefly later in my presentation for Sweden. So for each country we have key trends, examining core systems such as energy, mobility and food. And this has been created in close collaboration with the member countries' experts. If there is one headline from our report, it is this. Nature is the foundation for ensuring human health, security and prosperity. Nature is not a luxury. Nature is non-negotiable. And this illustration from the report is really, trying to explain that more in detail. Working from the inner circle outwards, first in blue you can see the basic human needs like health, security, livelihoods, affairs, society. In yellow, our production and consumption systems like energy, homes, food, mobility. And in the outer circle, our environmental assets, land, soil, water, biodiversity, minerals, a stable climate. And these are exactly that, assets. And they can be depleted and destroyed. And without them, nothing from the inner two circles can be ensured. So when we talk about security, when we talk about competitiveness or health, prosperity, resilience, we should always remember that we are, as human beings, 100% dependent on these natural assets. And that the stable climate and functioning environment are the foundation for everything we strive to achieve. This was also highlighted very well by President Ursula von der Leyen in her State of the Union address in the autumn. She highlighted the importance of the European Green Deal, urging us to stay the course on our climate and environment goals, because the science is crystal clear, she said, and because the economic and security case is equally compelling. She underlined the importance of reducing our dependencies, the importance of creating front-running industries to provide jobs and opportunities and to ensure also just transition to sustainability. So all this is linked. Some highlights now, topic by topic, and I start with nature. The state and outlook for Europe's biodiversity and ecosystems is overall poor. The table shows here past trends on the left and then future outlook on the right. And of course, the color codes are perhaps self-evident. This blue-green is the positive one, yellow something mixed, red a negative trend. And one can say that biodiversity is really declining in Europe, unfortunately. And this happens across lands, freshwater, marine ecosystems. And while we have made some progress in the geographical extent of protected areas, we do not see sufficient improvement in the health of the ecosystems within those areas. And of course, climate change continues to have significant negative impact on our ecosystems, and these impacts are expected to worsen. Another example is soil. Soil resources are under heavy pressure, with 60 to 70% of soils in Europe now degraded. This example covers the most recent reporting period available, and of course it is old data, and now this year member countries have now reported more recent data. But anyway, we don't expect that there's a major improvement, I have to say. This shows that 60% of species assessed on the left side and 80% of the habitats on the right were in poor or bad state. So one can really say that ecosystems are in trouble. And yet, at the same time, almost 3/4 of euro area companies depend on at least one ecosystem service for their business activity. Water. Europe's water resources are under severe and sustained pressure. Water stress is already affecting 1/3 of European citizens. The map here shows seasonal water scarcity, and of course you can see that particularly Southern Europe is vulnerable, but we also see pressures in other regions which are heavily dependent on intensive agriculture, Northern France and Belgium as examples. And indeed, this chart here on the right shows that agriculture is really makes up the lion's share of water consumption. So, in order to improve resilience of the food system also, we need more efficient agricultural practices along with continued action on climate change. So when it comes to food security, again, nature is key. Climate. Europe, as you know, is the world's fastest warming continent, and here in the north, the impacts are even more, let's say, rapid and serious. The climate is changing at an alarming rate. This summer, again, we saw set new records. This time it was for the wildfires in Europe, but also here in the north, at least I was experiencing quite some heat waves, and this is really coming tangible. What does it mean? What kind of future we have in Europe? And each year seems to bring a new devastation. Overall trends on climate change, if we look at this kind of indicators and trends, comparatively positive picture, especially if we look at the past trends on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, the energy system transition, and climate change governance. But when we look at the outlook, future, we see a more mixed picture. So this means that we need to really accelerate the pace and scale of actions if we are to meet the key targets. And climate risks are really ever present, and they will only increase in the coming years. So we must urgently scale up investments in climate change preparedness and improve our societal resilience. This is about the good graph, one of the good and positive messages of the report, how well Europe has managed to cut its greenhouse gas emissions from the baseline 1990. So it is really also showing that member states with the consistent measures, we are most likely going to meet the 2030 target. So this is the good news. But then if we look at the global trend, it is a different story. Greenhouse gas emissions unfortunately continue to rise. And here is of course one of the great conundrums for Europe. Only concerted global action will get us where we need to be on the climate mitigation. There is, of course, this is not the reason for Europe to let's say, raise the hands and say that we give up. Rather, it is Europe's opportunity to consolidate its position as global leader. Both because it is the right thing to do, if we also look at the historical, let's say, emissions, but also for the economic and societal opportunities that come with when we lead with the technologies of the future and not those of the past. Climate change is driving increasingly unpredictable and extreme weather, and besides, of course, devastation and loss of lives, this also leads to very real economic impacts for European citizens and countries. This map displayed here shows economic losses per capita due to climate change-related weather events between 1980 and 2023. And worsening climate impacts could lead to estimated losses of 2.4 trillion euros between 2031 and 2050 if warming surpasses 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is now highly likely. So we must really build urgently resilience. And we can, for example, by using nature-based solutions, improving flood protection, or creating natural cooling in the cities. So again here, nature is key. Health. Of course, I mean, our natural environment also underpins our health. Pollution, unfortunately, continues to significantly reduce quality of life in Europe, and the greatest impacts often fall on the vulnerable groups, such as children or elderly, or those who are socioeconomically deprived. Here we see a worsening picture. We have made great progress on reducing air pollution over the last 10-15 years, but when we look at the future outlook, it's more mixed, with significant challenges around noise, water and chemical pollution. As you can see from this graph, this is the other good news of the report. There are basically only perhaps two. We have made great progress in reducing the air pollution, and this graph shows how the premature deaths attributable to air pollution are coming down. And we are on track to meet our 2030 target, or actually now with the latest information we are meeting, or we are even over-exceeding it. Well, this is, of course, I mean, thanks to the decades of pollution control legislation and decarbonization efforts, the efforts also in the member states, cities, regions. But there's also more to be done. 10% of premature deaths in Europe are still driven by exposure to polluted air, water and soil, as well as noise and harmful chemicals. And human biomonitoring shows that there is a high prevalence of harmful chemicals found within the bodies of European citizens. And overall exposure to air pollutants is 1/3 higher in the poorest regions of Europe. So of course in Sweden it's quite a different situation, but if you go to southeast Europe, air is quite different. Resources. Our European way of life depends on natural resources, and not only European resources, but also those across the globe. And we in the EU consume materials much more than in most other world's regions, and our consumption, one can say, is simply unsustainably high. A circular economy is central to the European Commission's vision for a climate neutral, competitive and secure Europe. And on paper, everybody can agree, it's no brainer. Moving to circular economy can significantly reduce emissions, reduce waste, and reduce dependency on imported raw materials. However, if we look at the overall picture, we see it's rather mixed. We have made some progress when it comes to circular design and waste recycling, but other indicators such as waste generation and circular use of materials require serious attention. And as mentioned, global impacts of Europe's current levels of consumption are not sustainable. This is only one headline example, circular material resource use. And the key element here, if you can see, is the blue line in the middle. It shows that in 2023, Europe achieved a circularity rate of just 11.8%. And this is only 1% more than it was in 2010, so 15 years earlier, and well below the ambition of the Circular Economy Action Plan. So despite our efforts, Europe's economy is largely linear, posing, of course, also a threat to so-called strategic autonomy. So all in all, based on our report, what do we need to be most worried about? What are the red flags? And I'm afraid it's a long list. Biodiversity and ecosystems. Really, this ongoing biodiversity loss is a serious issue, and impacts of climate change on ecosystems will make it more difficult. Soil degradation and water scarcity also very, very serious. Climate in general, the severe impacts of climate change that we have already started seeing and which will get worse. Failing rates of carbon sequestration, including forest sinks, and emissions from especially agriculture and transport, which continue to be high and difficult to abate. Pollution, chemicals, prevalence of chemicals in the environment, water pollution, degradation of marine ecosystems, and finally, the slow progress towards circularity and unsustainable overall consumption. So, quite grim picture. But let's look at a bit how does it look for Sweden. Based on these indicators, which are harmonized, I mean the set of indicators are harmonized across Europe, so one can in principle also compare countries. And overall in Sweden, as with most of Europe, the trends for biodiversity and climate are negative, and these areas need to be prioritized in the coming years. Economic losses from weather and climate-related extreme events in Sweden have increased over the past decade, and these are driven by more frequent and intense storms, floods, also heat waves and wildfires. And these are due to climate change, or getting worse due to climate change. Sweden has done extremely well in reducing greenhouse gas emissions across its economy over the past 20 years. Electricity production in Sweden is mainly fossil-free and largely based on hydro, wind and nuclear power, so that can be definitely celebrated. However, in recent years, the country's forests and lands have absorbed less and less carbon, at least based on the data that we today have. And this shrinking carbon sink has cancelled out much of the Sweden's progress on emission reduction, so that the overall net emissions in 2024 are higher than before. Waste generation has increased overall since 2010, although the trend is not linear, and the sharp rise up to 2014 was driven largely by mining waste. So of course, countries like Sweden have this specific sector, or group of waste, which is perhaps distorting a bit the picture. Waste generation per capita remains above 2010 levels due to structural factors such as growing economy, growing population, high construction and infrastructure activity, increased extraction of raw materials, and resource-intensive consumption patterns, along with improved reporting. So also, of course, I mean, the how do we measure, what does the data really tell is behind these indicators. Our political discourse is on climate and environment has progressed, as I said at the beginning, over the last decade. Europe's societies and landscapes, as illustrated by this picture, are changing as our energy systems are transitioning to more sustainable models. And these kind of signals are all around us, all over Europe. And they show that the seeds for so-called transformative change have already been sown. And we have also numerous levers for change. Policy levers here on top of the in the green bubble provide the framework to implement the change we need. And the European Green Deal has really been a paradigm shift in our approach to environmental challenges. And implementation, which we will be a topic of the next presentation, is really key here. So implementing legislation that we and policies that we now have in place is really vital. Then we have also economic levers, the blue bubble here. Also well-developed area. We know what kind of subsidies, investments and fiscal policies can catalyze the change we need. And we also know what kind of measures are harmful and need to be phased out. And we also have socio-technological levers, such as mechanisms for making really, sustainability a reality, like how to incentivize electrification, circular design, social equity, or green skills. And these levers can be used now to steer the future direction of Europe's economy and society. So climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution continue to pose significant risks, and these are really serious risks. But we also see signs of change and reasons for hope, so it is not only doom and gloom. And we see how consistent policy combined with solid implementation can drive real change. Europe is a frontrunner and it hopefully remains as a frontrunner. And of course, to come back to where I started, how nature, our stable climate, our environment is really crucial for prosperity, competitiveness and security as well. Food, water, resource security, but also linked to fairness in our society or health, good quality of life. So all these things that we appreciate are underpinned by nature, by our natural assets. So to repeat, nature is not a luxury. It is a must-have for Europe. So how to reach the objective of the EU's Environmental Action Programme? To live well within the limits of our planet. That is now at stake as well. We are quite far from that goal, but now we have the groundwork. Some of the groundwork has been laid. And we have created policies and frameworks for action. So now we simply have to concentrate our efforts, stay focused and implement. So I hope that this report with all this data that is available on the website is serving also here in Sweden you as a knowledge base that you can use in your work in this sustainability transition. And of course to catalyze urgent action. Thank you for your attention. Do you have a microphone on? Sorry.
I'm not going to repeat everything again. So the question I have, though, we are talking, it's a different landscape that you're meeting when you're presenting the report. We have a lot of private sector here, we have a lot of business here, we have, of course, the traditional NGOs and so on here as well. But what has been the reaction from the report? Do you have any sense of how it is actually how is it met by the different stakeholders? Can you reach out also to new stakeholders that we need to get on board in the environmental arena? What is your initial feeling about this?
I would say that our messages are resonating with the audiences that we have been able to reach, and of course these kind of country launches are really important to also reach out beyond our typical Brussels bubble or our typical environment and climate constituencies. So really, of course, we could still do better and have more engagement of especially business sector or financing sector, those actors who are now needed if we want to really make big leaps in the sustainability transition. And of course, sometimes, yes, still our language is difficult, so I don't claim that every message in our report is understood correctly. But of course, we hope that also countries can now use this data, this analysis and the country profiles to induce the national discussions as well. And of course, the civil society plays an enormously important role as well, and we hope to really also use them as amplifiers of our data and knowledge.
Yeah, because that's of course important. I mean, you have the formal distribution of the information, but of course, this is also a report that has to be carried by many others. Can I see if there is a question here from the audience? Unfortunately, on live stream, I cannot catch up questions. Anyone who wants to ask a question here? Come on, guys, don't be so shy. Good. So we have a question here. Yes, please.
No.
Does it work or? Let's see. Is the microphone working or that one?
Hello?
Yeah, now it works. Good.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Simona Pitt. I work here in Stockholm, but I'm still affiliated in Wageningen University in the Netherlands. It's a very interesting report. As we saw also in the first European climate risk assessment, one of the key issues to see how we can inform subnationally as well. So I took regions and also about transboundary impacts and the likes. So I wonder talking about stakeholders, how do you address the people on the ground that are actually driving the change, the real levers of transformation, besides the usual institutional suspects?
That's a good question. Yeah. Oh, it's a good question. Yes.
You're absolutely right. That I mean, really, the implementation, especially when we come to the practical solutions for mobility. I mean, heating. It's very often, I mean, driven or the water. I mean, issues. It's driven by the regional or even local authorities. And of course, also the solutions like nature-based solutions. Yes, they require action and let's say readiness at the even local let's say level. It is not easy for us to reach all the actors, but of course we have, for example, the Committee of the Regions in Brussels, who actually it consists of the representatives from cities and regions. So we have had presentations and discussions with that committee, and hopefully then that helps to trickle down our messages. But of course, again here the country events or how we carry now nationally these messages in your events, in your language, is of course also highly important, because we mainly can do these events, I mean, in English, whereas sometimes it's really important to also have the national language events.
And the report is translated into all
no,
the EU
I'm afraid we don't have a budget to translate it. Now, of course, nowadays one can translate relatively easily. I mean, at least summaries with machine translation. So, and countries have done some work on press release, etc., the general material, but unfortunately we don't have the resources to translate it and verify the translations.
And that's of course still a barrier, no doubt.
It is.
So, additional question, we have one more. Yes, one up here, Jutta.
Thank you for a very good presentation and timely report. I think it will be very appreciated. I have a question. You mentioned in the presentation also fair policy. I mean, you had that dimension, but I didn't see in the presentation distribution policy. I mean, it's also about where the resources goes. So if it is a just transition or not. So I wonder in the report, is that addressed? because we see that different income group might be affected differently if you have a transition, and also the willingness for the legislators to do more is very affected from that. So I wonder, do you have that aspect in the report, or?
At least in the narrative, yes, it is. So we have section also on the just transition and what does it entail. And yes, all in all, our agency's work is also about that. Of course, we are limited again with the data, that we don't necessarily have direct access to such socioeconomic data that would easily allow us to make some regional distributions. But we do, for example, know indeed that the climate adaptation can also risk this just transition. So we have to really pay attention that we do not lead to maladaptation, which is then aggravating actually these kind of social elements, social justice elements. But the report is only 200 pages, so it doesn't go into detail, but it also points to data sources and other reports which are looking more in detail this just transition aspects. But it is important, and it's also, I understand, important for the current policy agenda of the Commission. So.
Absolutely, it goes back a little bit to the first question as well. I mean, when you really step down to the local or regional implementation to understand there as well, what is actually happening, what will be the implications of environmental policies, for instance, when it comes to fairness and so on. So I think we talked about it earlier, the fact that getting all this data on board is really challenging, of course. Lena, a warm thank you. You will come back also towards the end of the seminar and give some comments as well. So a warm thank you for this. And you mentioned one important word, implementation.
Yes.
It's all about implementation, isn't it? So, just having that in mind, why don't we invite someone who will now tell us about implementation? So Cyril Ritter, presentation of the Environmental Implementation Review. You are from the DG Environment, so a warm welcome and applaud.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Thanks for the nice introduction. Indeed, the European Environmental Implementation Review. That's a bit of a mouthful, but you managed very well, Johan. Let's call it the EIR. Thanks so much for the invitation, Johan, Annika. Thanks so much for the presentation, Leena. I think if I am paraphrasing you correctly, in the last points of your presentation, you said we have the knowledge and frameworks in place, and now we need implementation, right? Is that a fair summary of your points? So that's where implementation comes in. I want to present the EIR report, which came out in July this year. And while the EEA report, you could say, is a bit more of a scientific report, it's there to highlight the scientific and environmental indicators. The EIR is a report which is a bit more focused on legal compliance. What conclusions would you draw from the EEA report, and both your report and our report rely on the same EEA data? What conclusions would you draw from all those data about the legal compliance of the member states in this field, in the field of EU environmental law? What is the state of implementation of EU environmental law in the member states? That's really the purpose of this report. The report came out in July, and it's the work of more than 100 people in DG Environment in the Commission over 9 months, also drawing on EEA data, on data from the member states. It's a 1,400-page package, so I'm very happy to give you a very short summary in these 20 minutes so that you save a lot of time, and instead of doing that reading, you can rely on this summary. The report is made up of a communication with the key headline messages on the importance of implementation, on implementation lessons about what works less well, and the factors of good implementation. And the report especially brings together 27 individual country reports on the environmental performance and the environmental implementation in each member state. The report is fully translated, and let me go straight into the key points that the report makes. The first point is implementation gap. By implementation gap, we mean that compared to the legal obligations of all the member states, compared to where they should be in terms of environmental indicators, there is still a gap to compliance. So we're not exactly at the level of implementation environmental indicators that we where we wish to be. And as you know, legislation is merely, a wish unless it's fully implemented on the ground. The purpose of implementation is to turn legislation into change on the ground. And unfortunately, we are not quite at that level yet. Another key point of the report is benchmarking. By benchmarking, we mean the idea of comparing each member state to other member states when it comes to a particular ranking on a particular environmental indicator, but also comparing member states to their own performance in the past. Because if you compare your performance over time, then you have a better idea of the measures that work, the measures that work a bit less well, and then you can adapt your behavior accordingly. The report also contains priority actions, which are a list of the most urgent and important actions to be taken in the field of environment for each member state. That list is endorsed by the College of Commissioners, so it is a commission document with a sort of to-do list for each member state that we will come back to in our dealings with the member states, in the various political dialogues that we hold with the member states. We will certainly stress that list of priority actions that have to be taken in the various fields, be it climate, waste, circular economy, nature, pollution, and financing. Another key point of the report is the investment gap, and that is really a point that I want to stress today. I will bring a lot of attention to the financing and investment aspect. I think, Leena, you called it the economic levers to get to the green transition. We call it investment gap or the financing aspects. It is the amount of money that is needed for each member state to top up its current environmental spending to reach full compliance, to reach full implementation. One reason why we're not at the stage of full implementation is that there is not enough financing which is devoted to that, either because of particular budgetary pressures on the member states, or because of budgetary choices maybe, or because of the effectiveness of spending. Because of these various measures, we're not always at the level of investment that is needed to fully implement environmental law. Some of that spending is one-off spending, some of that spending is recurring spending every year, but we have put together an estimate of the top-up investment that is needed, and I'll get to that in a second. Another point that we stress is really the importance of Commission support. I mean, Leena said that the member states have a lot of work to do to reach full implementation, but the member states are not doing this alone. The member states are actually able to draw on best practices, on experiences drawn from neighboring member states, and I know that member states speak to each other. Of course, the agencies speak to each other, the ministries speak to each other, they speak to the Commission to be able to understand best practices, to share knowledge, to understand what works, and also to understand shared challenges. Sometimes a particular environmental issue is best dealt with collectively instead of on your own, of course. Some of these issues are cross-border, especially when it comes to pollution. And finally, I'll go into the key factors of good implementation, so that we have a bit of a shopping list of things that we can rely on to maybe move to better implementation. So to summarize, we'll go into Sweden's environmental performance, as well as the tools of implementation, and a bit on financing at the end of my presentation. This is a one-slide summary of the 50-page report on Sweden. I do recommend that you go to the report because it is full of interesting information, graphs, comparisons with other member states. I know that the member states themselves are very interested in seeing how their own member state performs compared to others, and that is the purpose of benchmarking. It's not so much naming and shaming. It's rather a way to see how well you're doing compared to another member state, and maybe whether there is something to learn, or at least to know whether you're doing badly or whether you're doing well. On Sweden, please correct me if I'm wrong and use the questions for that. On Sweden, I think there is a bit of a cliche that I hear from many colleagues, that I hear from colleagues in the Commission, and the cliche that I hear from even colleagues in the Swedish government. The cliche is that Sweden has an abundance of nature and water. And that is, of course, true. It's maybe a little bit less true than it used to be at the same time. So we can be mindful of the ways in which Sweden is blessed by so much nature and water, but we should also be mindful of the need to preserve that nature and that water. But let's go a bit more into the detailed points. There are many positive points, and again, Leena made the point that it's not all doom and gloom. We should be aware of the progress that has been made, if only to understand the measures that work. That is super important. And the many positive points about Sweden are, for example, the low CO2 intensity, but also the air quality in Sweden has made tremendous progress. So that's a huge bright spot about Sweden, although there are a couple of dark spots on air pollution, and I'll come to that a few bullet points below. Sweden has a huge share of renewables in its power generation, I think the highest share in Europe. Sweden has a below average waste volume that is at the level of household waste. It also has a very low level of landfilling, much lower than in many other member states, and it has a huge proportion of organic food production, also among the best performing countries in the EU on these points. Now, at the same time, there are some pointers that the report highlights and that I want to highlight today on the points of attention, maybe, that are particularly important when it comes to Sweden's environmental implementation. One is when it comes to waste and circular economy, Sweden has an increasing waste volume. So even not taking into account mining waste, and even taking into account the fact that household waste is at a lower level than other member states, and that is quite a good level, it is actually going in the wrong direction. So the generation of household waste is actually increasing, and I know that the Swedish colleagues and the Swedish government is making huge efforts to control that better, to collect more, to recycle more. One aspect, as you know, is the drive towards increasing door-to-door and building by building household waste collection. But that is one way to increase that issue, but we need to be mindful of that issue. A related issue is the high level of use of incineration in Sweden compared to other ways to dispose of waste. Waste in the first place could maybe not become waste if it was reused, or if it does become waste, it could be recycled. But incineration, of course, is not the best way to handle all that material. And all of that relatively low level of recycling in Sweden leads to low resource productivity. Resource productivity is the amount of material that you use to generate €1, 1 Swedish crown of GDP which is used in the country. You could be a very economical, very efficient country and use a very low amount of resources to generate €1 GDP. Of course, that depends a bit about the profile of your economy. If you have a very service-oriented economy, then you don't need many materials. If you have a more industry-oriented economy, then you need more materials. So we need to be mindful of that profile and how that profile of the economy influences resource productivity. But we see nonetheless, even compared to other similar countries in terms of profile of the economy, even compared to France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden has a relatively low resource productivity in the sense that it uses many kilos or tons of material to generate GDP. That is material which is either imported or extracted instead of being recycled. If you had a better resource productivity, that would be using more recycled material to generate GDP. On air pollution, I mentioned a couple of dark spots. One is ammonia, which is, as you know, a gas that comes from agriculture manure management. And a lot of that ammonia management comes down to enabling the farmers to be well equipped with the right machinery, techniques, training to be able to handle ammonia emissions. And another dark spot on air pollution is when it comes to PM10, so that is particulate matter at the level of 10 nanometers. There are enormous amounts of progress that have been made in Sweden, in particular when it comes to Stockholm, and I think many of you may have seen the EEA Clean Air City ranking. I think that came out right in June, Leena. And I think that is a list of 800 European cities ranked by air pollution or air quality. You can see that Stockholm is in the top 10 of all these 800 cities in Europe. It is the cleanest EU capital in Europe, and Stockholm actually used to be the subject of an infringement case concerning the quality of its air, but now that problem is relatively solved. By comparison, there are some other areas of Sweden that still suffer from PM10 pollution, and we know the sources of that pollution. That is typically the interaction between tires and asphalt, in particular in the north of Sweden. Now, when it comes to water, the report also makes the case, based on infringement cases, based on dialogues with Sweden, that there are insufficient controls over water uses. So a water use might be water abstraction, pumping out water from a well. It might be using water by damming a river. It might be using water because some runoff from a construction site is going into water and it's polluting either through diffuse pollution or point source pollution. Those are all water uses. And Sweden seems to have an insufficient level of controls and reviews of those controls over water uses, in particular when it comes to hydropower plants. You may know that Sweden is now reviewing the water permits for its 2,000 hydropower plants between now and 2040. That is quite a long time frame for reviewing those water permits. And finally, one element that we stress in the report is the pollution through nitrates from agriculture. That pollution goes into the rivers with, as you know, the algae that we see both in the rivers and also on the seaside and in the Baltic Sea. Now, Leena mentioned also the decline in biodiversity in Sweden, which is notable even through the most recent Article 17 Habitats Directive reporting. That is combined with an insufficient network of Natura 2000 areas in Sweden. The Habitats Directive, as you know, is one of the oldest directives in EU environmental law, and it's really a foundation of EU nature law. So having an insufficient network, having an insufficient view of the areas that should be designated as protected areas to preserve species or habitats, that is really a little bit behind compared to the schedule that we could have expected from Sweden in this area. And finally, when it comes to forest degradation, I think Swedish sources, official sources themselves from the government, acknowledge that there is a certain degree of forest degradation which is affecting both the forests as a site of biodiversity, but also the forests as a carbon sink functions. That degradation is affecting both of these functions of Sweden's forests. So let me go straight to the solutions. It's not all doom and gloom. There are some positive sides, but there are also some positive insights about the future. How do we get out of that implementation gap? Well, the Commission stands by the member states, through dialogue, through political dialogue, through dialogue among experts, but also through guidance. As you know, EU environmental law is a hugely broad and wide and complex and deep area of law. And so the Commission understands that based on the request from member states, there may be some needs for more guidance in particular areas. And there's also a huge need for funding and technical assistance. Some of that funding comes in the form of regional policy, cohesion policy, common agriculture policy funding, but also through the Recovery and Resilience Plan, through the Social Climate Fund. There's an enormous amount of EU funds going in the direction of being used for green spending in Sweden, and it's hugely important that all of that money is well spent. But also the Commission spends money directly with the member states through technical assistance, so through paying for experts, paying for workshops, or contributing its own staff to technical assistance workshops. Now, another type of how can I put it, factors of good implementation is what the member states themselves can do to implement EU environmental law better. And here you have 5 bullet points at the bottom, which are drawn from our experience in dealing with the member states' infringement cases, but also implementation difficulties. It might be that the member states tell us, look, we have an issue with financing. It's not a matter of not being willing to implement. It's a matter of wanting to implement, in a more efficient way. And here are 5 ways to implement environmental law in a more efficient way. One is to integrate environmental policy in public policy more broadly. Another one is financing. Another one is administrative capacity, especially in those member states that are very federal and where there is a lot of work to coordinate the central government and the local authorities. Digital data, of course, is a must when it comes to measuring the state of the environment, but also measuring the progress made through measures. And finally, public participation and access to justice. those should not be seen as delays, but rather as due diligence. Those public participation and access to justice are ways to troubleshoot and to do due diligence on projects so that the people who are closest to a project are able to draw the attention of the authorities on particular issues through public participation. Now, when it comes to financing, I want to do 2 last short slides on bringing that financing dimension to environmental implementation. You can see on the slide on the right, and if you have very good eyesight, maybe you see around the middle of the graph, the bar representing Sweden here. It is here, and you can see it in dark green. That is the money that is spent by the government on environmental spending. And the kind of light blue or turquoise part of the bar is the money which is currently missing. So that is the investment gap. The investment gap here is expressed in percentage of GDP. So approximately 1% of GDP is spent by the government, but 1.5% of GDP is currently missing. You can also see that, and you can see the breakdown of that money which is currently missing. You can see that breakdown by area. So most of the missing money is currently missing for biodiversity and nature spending, right? 7 billion euros. What conclusions would you draw from that, from the financing angle? It is that financing is a key issue in the environmental transition. We all talk on a daily basis, and with some of you that I know from the audience, with my colleagues in the Commission, with my colleagues in the Swedish government that I met this morning, I typically talk about legislation, but also about implementation. The financing dimension needs a lot more attention. The financing is a key dimension to take into account to ensure that the funds go to environmental priorities and the funds do not go to environmentally harmful spending. It would make little sense to spend on one hand, with one hand to spend on environmental protection and to spend other funds with the other hand on environmentally harmful subsidies or spending. How do you know that it's worth spending that money on the green transition? We did a cost-benefit analysis to make sure that we would have a key message for policy makers across Europe. So we have an analysis of the cost of action, that is the investment gap added up for all member states across the EU. So the graph that I showed you previously on Sweden, if you add up all that investment gap, the money which is currently missing for the green transition in all the member states currently amounts to 122 billion euros per year for the EU as a whole. So that's all member states. Compared to that, can you put a figure on the current cost of inaction? So the currently ongoing costs of failing to fully implement EU environmental law. And those are costs that Leena mentioned, the cost to nature, but those are practical costs for all of us. These are not future costs, these are current costs in terms of lives lost, in terms of the burden of disease, people living with disease, in terms of loss of productivity from people not showing up for work because of disease. Productivity losses, the cleanup costs, and also the loss of ecosystem services. If you add up all those ongoing costs of environmental damage, you get to a cost of 180 billion euros per year for Europe as a whole. So the conclusion from this is that the cost of action is cheaper than suffering from environmental damage. The cost of action is cheaper. It is cheaper to complete the green transition than to suffer the ongoing environmental costs that are currently suffered not only by state budgets, but also by households, by people, by businesses. All of these entities currently suffer these 180 billion euros of environmental costs, and it's actually cheaper to fix that than to suffer the cost. So that's really my key message that I want to leave with you as a takeaway from this talk. Thanks so much.
Excellent, Cyril. We're going to have a coffee break, but I'm sure there will be a lot of people who like to talk to you about this. Of course, we could have a seminar only about these kind of cost calculations. I think there are a lot. We are fortunate that this actually turned out that way. It would be misfortunate if it would be the other way around.
We had a feeling it would turn out this way.
You had a feeling. I'm pleased to hear
If
that.
you have different figures, I'm happy to see them.
No, I don't think so. Hopefully not. So anyway, we have 15-minute coffee break. We will start 1:15 sharp. So please grab a coffee, talk to Cyril, talk to Leena, and a big thank you to both of you for the presentations.
Thanks so much.
The panelists, if you can stand here already from the start. Du kan ha den här. Så bra, välkomna tillbaka allesammans. Nu ska vi se, jag hoppas jag har 2 ytterligare panelister på ingång här också. Har vi Daniel och ja men bra. Och med kaffekopp och allt nu. So welcome back everyone. Please take your seats and we will continue. So we've had 2 really interesting reports, and we will now have a chance to discuss a little bit from these reports, the insights and some of the conclusions and some of the recommendations that are also included there. And to do so, we have a good and prominent panel. And from my left here, we have Karin Lexén, who is the Secretary General of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation. Then we have Jytte Guteland, who is the Member of Parliament for the Social Democrats from Sweden. We have Daniel Westlén, the State Secretary at the Government Offices of Sweden, State Secretary to the Minister Romina Pourmokhtari. And then we have Marie Trostam, the Head of Sustainability and Infrastructure Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, the longest title. Unfortunately, we don't have Lina Ney, who is stating in the program because she turned ill. So what I would like to ask first is to just a general comment. I mean, we've heard these 2 presentations. I understand that there are a lot of things, a lot of perspectives that you would like to reflect upon, but really sort of the key reflections that you would like to state here. Daniel, can I start with you from the government side? A lot of the actually recommendations, not least in the last report, is actually directed to the government as well. So please, Daniel.
Yes. Well, generally, both reports show us a lot of things that I think most of us knew already. These are cross-sectional issues that we have to work with throughout society, and that's probably why it's so complex to solve the problems that we are working on, because so many people have to work together from different disciplines for this to go all the way. But also, obviously, the shortcomings are familiar to us, and I guess maybe there was something new. I like, particularly among new things that I didn't see before, I really like the quantification of the cost of climate change, because that is a very useful number. When we have that quantified, I think we can much easier argue for mitigating emissions. Now, from a national perspective, obviously, these were also things that we know of, but I also like to see that most of the things that you pointed out, particularly as areas where Sweden have to improve, it's also areas where we are actually putting in hard work, and quite recently has done more than we used to do. And I'm thinking about air quality, where we are strengthening the regulations. That's just coming into effect. The waste management, where we have been just circulating for public opinion, rather large changes in how we work with waste management and recycling in this country that will gradually come into effect and hopefully have a big effect on the waste volumes and how much we recycle in different material streams. Ammonia, we have in the budget for this year, we're spending money on trying to help the farmers reduce the emissions, and we're really hoping for that to give an effect. Particles, same thing there. Municipalities have gotten more responsibility to do things to limit the small particles from, these are medium particles, the PM10 from the tires and the cars. On the water use side, we have a good dialogue with the Commission on how to become better at reporting the use of water. We haven't really considered that historically in Sweden because, as you said, water is abundant, and we kind of used it as a free resource for everybody. But it is a good point from the Commission that we need to keep a little bit better track of this. And nutrition into water bodies, we've been working on this for decades. Progress is too slow, so the government has paced that up quite significantly through its bill on the ocean environment. I think I'll stop there for now, and then we can.
That's great. It's a great summary, and it shows also that these kind of assessments are actually very important because it helps to point out priority areas. And of course, we can also see from the agency side that you're making proposals now for big investments in many of these areas as well to take them forward. Marie, the role of the private sector is constantly increasing, and you are also becoming, in many ways, a pusher when it comes to policy. You know, stay the course. Don't start to change the system now. What is your general reflection when you listen to these two presentations?
Yes, thank you. First of all, it's really great that we speak about implementation. It's the action that we need to focus on. But coming back to the Europe's Environment Report, I think you used the word, Johan, comprehensive. I think we really appreciate that the multiple challenges we are facing, as we all know about geopolitical tensions, but also climate and nature-related risk, but also societal polarization, that this report actually touches upon that. And specifically from the Swedish business sector, I would say that we don't choose between competitiveness or sustainable development. So that's really important to emphasize that the direction and the route ahead, I mean, it is clear. But of course, we then need to focus on the enabling conditions in order to facilitate for the business sector to be able to innovate, invest, and also focus on resilience. But just putting these challenges together and also realize that's the environment where the business sector is actually working now and also considering. But of course, the focus on economic growth, we heard about productivity here, that is essential, of course, also from the business sector.
Yeah, we come back to some of these dimensions, really, again, you know, how we put environmental or sustainability issues in this broader context of policy areas. Jytte Gutland, you are a Swedish parliamentarian today, but you also have a long experience from EU and EU policies as well. So, I mean, your perspective also in that dimension would be interesting, of course, when we now see shifting policies in the EU as well. But if the first reflections from you listening to these two reports, what would they be?
Thank you, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here today and listen to this interesting presentations of the two reports. And Leena's presentation, I think it was, you could get overwhelmed by how many things we have to tackle and how big it is. But I was not left with that feeling after the presentation. I felt more encouraged that we can see that many of these things are linked together and need this one health approach, and we need to work with tools that will enable a more positive direction. And I also feel from many of the slides that we can also see what the EU has accomplished. And we see when you look at the legislation that a lot has been done when it comes to climate. So we have legislation that is functioning, that is sometimes have at this moment of time a bit of a backlash maybe, but not that big. I mean, there are still consensus that this is the roadway to the future, and I feel that yes, there are high tones in the debate on the EU level, but there is also many politicians from different parties that would like to continue this. And who also understands that there is no other solution. I mean, it would not be good for competition, it would not be good for planet, it would not be good for Europe if we do something else now. This is the road to the future. So there I feel more optimistic, but when it comes to environment and some of these slides about biodiversity, chemicals, I don't feel that we are there. I feel that we don't have legislation yet that is up to time where we are, because so much is happening and it goes fast, and we know that we have chemical cocktails in society for environment, for health. We need to do more. We have REACH up now for revision, and that is really a big task to make it function, to make it also protect the biodiversity, yet be understandable for companies, and make sure that Europe is moving forward. So that is a little bit of my reaction there. And Cyrus, there I must say that the benefit cost analyze slide in the end was really, I mean, everyone needs to be, we need to show this to everyone. I knew that I knew that there were a big cost of non-acting, but I mean the scale of it, and we often speak about the figures when it comes to jobs, because back then when I was the rapporteur for the climate law, I had many talks with the Commission and different seminars, and I had this, I got reports that showed that no country will have less jobs after the transition. No one. And higher ambition on climate will mean for all the countries that we are better off. Yet we have a debate today like this is a big cost for our companies, for the growth, for the jobs. And that is something that I will never believe it, because I've seen the figures, I've seen that, okay, we have regions that will need to transist in countries, but there is no country of all the 27 that will be a big loser from this transition. So this is super important. But you also manage with the report to show us that it's even bigger, it's a bigger scale. So I think that I will definitely tweet it and exit to everyone.
So putting numbers on things can sometimes really drive change. We'll see if Marie also agrees with that. The green transition is also job creation and competitiveness. We will hear. But first, we will hear from Carl Lexén. You also have a long career working internationally, but also now today focusing, of course, maybe mostly on Sweden and Swedish national policies. So what is your takeaway from the two reports that have just been presented? What are the key things?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me for being here. I'm also actually a part of the European Environmental Bureau Council, so I do follow the European environmental development as well. No, and I think it was really useful to also put these two reports together, and I'd like to echo what you just said, that the showcase of the cost of non-action is really very useful right now. And if we combine the picture where we see there is a crisis, there are many good examples on good development, but there is a crisis, and the sense of urgency when it comes to biodiversity couldn't be underestimated, I think. It's really something that worries me a lot. At the same time, it's also very interesting to see that the tools are on the table. We have the knowledge, we have the tools, and we have the legislation. So what we see and what we witness, and I'm speaking on behalf of the environmental movement, is unfortunately a backsliding. And one example on that is the criticism that was delivered by the European Ombudsman on the omnibus package, saying that it lacks transparency, saying that it lacks documentation and follow-up on climate consequences, etc. And I'd like to then sort of conclude by saying that the urgency that we feel is to break a narrative that we see developing. You have already addressed it, saying that it would be possible to prioritize sort of military security over environmental security. We need to really form a narrative and come back to narrative to say that acting on the environment, acting on climate is the foundation for the European security. We have to find the synergies. And acting on climate smart solutions, being at the forefront, also doing something now on the biodiversity crisis. This is building a security, food security, water security, and welfare and competitiveness for Europe in future. And here I think it is a call to our politicians, but it's a call to all of us. We all have to reach out to a larger circle than sitting in this room to really get this message through, to break the other narrative. Because if we don't, we are afraid of a continuous backsliding on the political side.
Okay, so the narrative there is interesting. It's also part of the report, of course, not least the environment report. And maybe we can stay on that. Sort of my first question is a little bit around the evolving European policy framework. There is happening a lot in Europe right now. As you mentioned, the Omnibus, we have the Omnibus 8, I think it is, on environment, leaking a little bit, expected maybe next week. So we see a lot of policy areas that are evolving right now. So how can we navigate that? Because this can be both challenges but also opportunities for the environmental agenda. Marie, maybe from your side, I mean, you are in the middle of trying to navigate that also from the private sector. What are your takeaways on that?
Yeah, first of all, it's important to stress that the ambition and the direction from the Swedish business community, I mean, we are still moving fast ahead. So speaking about the challenges in terms of regulation is coming down to pace and complexity. So, I mean, specifically for the small and medium-sized companies. So when the pace is as it has been, it's really hard as a small company to cope with that, and that creates uncertainty. And of course, that is a challenge as a company, and the administrative burden is a problem. But as you said, there is also an opportunity, and that's where we need to focus on, because when the legislation is fit for purpose and it's a common, technology neutral legislation, it will actually foster then the environment that will then scale low carbon and circular solutions. And just a few examples, if we focus on the single market, the harmonization of rules just within the single market, that's really key for our Swedish companies. And then we already touched upon circularity, and we look forward to the EU Circular Economy Act, where we will see the possibilities for scaling and also the focus on the design phase, but also looking into potential trade barriers in terms of the export, for example, of e-waste to a third country. That's something specific. But, and I think it was you who touched upon the chemicals. That's really important to raise that issue. And speaking about then a risk-based and evidence-driven chemical framework where we can actually increase the protection while simultaneously then make companies or incentivize companies to actually find new materials. So we need to include also the chemicals as an important part of the transformation, speaking also about regulation.
So a question about it, maybe I mean a bit shortly, because you represent companies in the federation they are global mostly. I mean, many of them are really global actors. So, okay, we have the European policy framework changing, but we also have a global policy changing quite rapidly. We have a new world order being developed. Is this more as a challenge, as you see it from the sustainability perspective, for companies in Sweden and Europe, or do they still see this still as an opportunity to take European leadership? Can you say something about that? Is this risking a kickback because the global playing field is changing so much?
I think the message is very clear that we need to keep the climate ambitions at EU level. That's really clear from the business sector. But then I guess that the very best solution is when we get it truly global. So specific focus also coming from the COP30 is a price on carbon. And of course, we would wish for a global price on carbon, but we see that a lot is happening at regional levels. And of course, the ETS and what has been done within the European Union is crucial, but we actually see within the climate area a lot is happening in countries like Thailand, Indonesia and Colombia, actually looking into both the CO2 tax and an emissions trading system. So I think from a business perspective, we aspire for the true global regulation, but EU has a truly important role there.
That's interesting. It's interesting because we tend to focus only on the negative sides, but there are also positive examples out there where we can push the agenda forward. Daniel, I guess, you're also in the middle of sort of Swedish politics. So yes, we have an evolving agenda, of course, in Europe. Similar challenges, of course, you can meet at the national level, having high performance on environmental issues. What do you see there as opportunities and challenges, considering the rapidly shifting policy arenas that we are operating in today?
Well, I mentioned the challenge of the cross-sectional nature of these matters that we're discussing, which obviously makes it very complex to find the solutions and to implement them, to make people actually go that way. And I think to get people moving, the only way is for them to see the opportunities, and part of it obviously is sound business models for solutions that solve the problems, and we really need to find those and show that they are there. The reason I think they're there is because of the main opportunity we have here. The European continent is probably the most popular place in the world to live. People like it here. That's our main competitive edge in Europe, is that we have liberal democracies with freedom of speech and all the other liberal rights. People love that. But also we have our culture that people enjoy, and people like to sit in those town squares having an espresso. And we have nature, and we have an environment around us which is not poisonous, be it air quality or freedom of chemicals that would poison us from our clothes or toys or food. And people trust that to work. So that is a real competitive advantage. So in the longer time scale, people take that for given. You said it, nature is not a luxury, it's a must-have. And it is for the Europeans. We expect nature to be there and that we can visit it and enjoy it, but also live from the ecosystem services that nature provides us and our companies. So it's since it's taken for granted, we always have to make sure that this is not deteriorating through loss of biodiversity or poisonous chemicals appearing from in our consumer products. So having said that, it's obvious that Europe has to move this way to keep this competitive advantage, and that means that there must be a way of connecting the business models for competitive companies with this long-term goal.
So it's going back a little bit to Karin's narrative story, actually, about Europe in this case. What would you like to add? In this evolving policy, you're also in the middle of that, of course, as a parliamentarian. Where do you see the opportunities or challenges related to environmental issues and pushing them forward in this policy landscape?
I start with the positive narrative, and then I get you depressed after. I would like to say that, first of all, I see that we have in our member states a majority of citizens that would like us to protect nature, to be active on climate change, and I see that that's the absolute majority. And when we have polls, it's not only Sweden; it's all the countries almost. That it's very clear that one would like the EU to take a leadership. So that is very much on the positive side. Also, the fact that I see that the Commission is very aware. The leader, Ursula von der Leyen, is clearly seeing that she doesn't want to abandon Fit for 55 or everything that's been done. She wants the Green Deal to continue, but maybe in a new form where it also addresses challenges of today. And I think that's very clear when you see how she tries to maneuver some of the political leaders that has not the same opinion. And I think also that when I listened to our Swedish commissioner, she said very clearly in the Swedish parliament that in the working program, when she was addressed from some, that maybe we should take it easy, maybe we should slow down. she said, I don't see that. I see that China is going faster. I see that we have Trump, but there are others in the US that understands that this is the road, it's going back, his way of navigating. And she also said that at the COP, they were very clear that many big polluters understand that they need to transist, and we will lose if we don't take the leadership here. I also see on the positive side that there are already so much going on in all the member states that's based on what's been done in the legislation. And I see companies, I see in Sweden so many companies that are so willing to do the job, and they want the leadership, and they also know that they will gain from it. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, there is a political backlash in some parties, and it's linked to some of the extremists that is having an agenda that is not because of climate or environment. It's because they would like to take a fight on the elite and the leaders in the countries, and they think they found something to make people scared with, and they work very they are working over globally. They are cooperating on this agenda. We see it more and more clear how it's also traveling across borders, and that is what we are working against. And I think we need to understand that this is a political, strategical, or tactic maneuver. It's not based on facts. It's not based on our companies. It's not based on our living conditions or on whether we should have a good life in the future. It is based on some people who would like political power, and they have an idea on how to maneuver, and they use this, and they use some other political slogans as well. Climate is one of them. Environment is one of them. They have others. And we need to understand that, and we have to stop sitting in their knees, and we need to understand that the majority is not interested in rolling back. So that's on the negative side.
And it was interesting, of course, to read the recent US policies in terms of Europe, really quite openly trying to affect even elections in Europe as well. So, Karin, what would you like to add? I mean, you talked about the narrative before also, but also if looking at your role as an environmental NGO, where do you see maybe the possibilities also coming up from this quite drastically changing European policy agenda? Also, for instance, the omnibus. I mean, I know you are maybe generally critical, but do you see also opportunities in terms of that arena also?
But let me say that, maybe leaning towards what you just said, that there might be parts that are utilizing also the omnibus in a way that maybe not Swedish enterprises would like to see. I mean, of course, I can understand that it can be an administrative burden for small enterprises. But what we see is a rolling back of very important environmental standards and human rights standards as well. So therefore, we are more concerned than positive, and perhaps that is also our role, to point out what is at stake and what is at risk. But I'd like to say that when it comes to climate, it was really interesting to see that we were really on the same side. Most of the Swedish companies and the environmental movements went towards COP. We were saying basically the same, even though, of course, my organization would like to see even a stronger target than the enterprises. Also on biodiversity, I can see a movement when it comes to interest and understanding of why it's so important for you as a private sector to engage in halting the biodiversity loss. So there are positive sides, but I must say that where I stand in civil society, there is a great deal of concern in relation to what is happening now. And we see a shrinking space also in Europe. We see a shrinking space when it comes to budget support for civil society. And I believe that also when it comes to security and resilience, a strong civil society that also plays a role of a watchdog is in fact very important for a prosperous society to develop. Of course, there are limits for how, in what way you do that criticism, but I think it's healthy for a society to have a strong civil society. So I am concerned, and we are concerned, but of course it's also important to look at all the positive development that has been. And I do believe that, referring to what has been said here before, that it's also very important, talking about narrative, to really put forward that most people do care about environmental issues. Most people do think it's important to have nature. They might not understand what severe risk we are facing and how urgent it is to address that. You might feel that we can wait a little bit and deal with a few things before that. So it's more, I think, about really reaching out, perhaps providing solutions to people that feel marginalized. Reach out also as an environmental movement to say we understand that you might feel afraid of losing your job or being set aside. So interestingly enough, when I went to the assembly of the European Environmental Bureau this spring, you might think that we would have discussed environmental issues. We did, of course, but mostly we did discuss how to reach out to the wider society, how to sort of help providing other suggestions on solutions than the quick fixes that the ultra-right wing are doing right now. So it is important to really recognize the threat, but also see all the positives sides that we have.
And again, being able to reach out in other policy areas in a way to explain how environmental issues
totally
are
agree.
integrated.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, I had many more questions, as you know, than we have time. But one of the questions that I think, and we deserve, I think our presenters deserve this. This is a little bit forward-looking. What is it that we can do? And you talked about, Leena, the levers of transformation. And of course, when we look at some of the challenges you have, also in terms of implementation, but also if you're looking at some of the trends, we need transformative change. I know the word is not always very popular because it might scare also people talking about narrative, but we need quite drastic change. So from your different perspectives, these key levers of transformative change, what are they? What is it that we can do actually to close the implementation gap, to close the gap between the challenges we have and where we want to be? What would you say, Marie, from your perspective?
Yes, a couple of them. First one being actually, we've already been touching upon it, the vision, why we are doing this. I think the lack of legitimacy, it's touched upon in the report as well. Why? This will create new types of jobs, skills development, and the importance of growth. Yes, the vision of why is this transformation important. That's one thing, the story, the rhetoric about it. And then another one is also touched upon in the report is in terms of implementation, the importance of cities and the local governments. In a broader sense, we do know that about 70% of the energy consumption as well as the material consumption is stemming from cities, and 70% of the global emissions. But also 80% of global GDP is coming from cities. So I think that a focus on also the ones that will be implementing this will be key. And then also to stress, which has already been done, the role of circularity. I think we cannot, we need to do more in terms of resource efficiency, which really resonates well with the resilience part as well. And then also that I see the awareness is really being raised now within the business sector, and that's the nature-related risks. We've heard about it already, and it's also in the report. About 50% of global GDP is dependent on the nature and the services that the nature provide, but also 70% of the businesses within the European Union, also stated in the report. And that's actually where the confederation will come out with a report on this topic, because it might be the next financial crisis to put the numbers on that. So the vision, the role of the cities and local governments, the role of circularity and the nature-related risks, but also nature-based solutions, I would say. There are some of the levers that I would like to mention.
But and it's interesting. I mean, if I may make a comment, even as a moderator, but from the perspective of the agency, the Nature Restoration Act that we are now to implement, which of course, it creates a lot of discussion in society, you can say. But it's interesting how your last point there maybe can change the narrative around the Nature Restoration Act. It is really about restoring nature, but it's also actually building resilience for future business to a certain extent, if those numbers that you are referring to actually are correct. So this is something I would at least take with me in that discussion moving forward. It's going to be interesting. And I know, of course, you are very engaged in this in different ways. Jutta, if I go to you also, what do you see as key levels of transformative change, if from a European or a Swedish perspective in particular, maybe?
On the European level, I would suggest that one would speak about sustainable Europe more. I know we have different terms, terminology, but I think it's important also that people can hear that we are still working towards the climate neutrality, but also addressing all those things that was mentioned in the reports. So sustainable Europe, or something that is showing that leadership. We need more of that. And I think that's, I mean, if you're not in politics, sometimes maybe you can think, but why is it so important? Why do we need these buzzwords? Is it really telling anything? It's not very concrete. But actually, it goes way beyond the Commission. It goes to other leaders, countries, companies, NGOs. So it is a leadership that will then turn into more concrete solutions and dialogues that will result in important things. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we need to address the things that was not addressed last mandate. I think about the things that were mentioned here, that's really big problems today. Transport is one. We see in many countries that we don't transist here, and we need to work faster. We need to electrify the cars, all the transport that we have the opportunity to do so. We need to make sure that we also, with the old cars and the trucks, make them go on other, transist, so they pollute less. We need to work on agriculture, forest, of course, in Europe. I mean, we see that we have done a lot when it comes to industry, a lot when it comes to the pollution that we get is really addressed via the ETS. So I'm welcoming the new ETS for the transports, for the buildings, but we need to make it work, and we need to make it work quite rapidly. So that is something that I think is extremely important. And then the circular economy, what's also mentioned, I think that is also key to success, that we must make it happen faster. And I know that you also agree with that from the government, but this is something that we see in all the member states, that they are not doing enough. So that's something that I'm very concerned about, and that I didn't feel was, the leadership was not enough. I mean, there are different legislative pieces, but the whole picture is not turned into the circular loop that we need.
It's interesting. I mean, all of you are talking about this narrative. I mean, the framework, as you say, there is a risk of fragmentation, maybe.
I will not take the word, but I need to say money.
Money.
We also need investments. That is something that we also missed.
Yeah.
So please, the new ones in the Commission, now, I mean, actually the US was a bit faster than us. We were fast on legislation, they were faster on money and investments. We need now to make sure that the money works in the right direction and stops pollute.
Excellent. And again, it was be interesting at some point, we can talk about this afterwards, but when you talk about the investments, you point out the numbers, is that only public investment? Because of course, a lot of investments is actually in the private sector itself. There are companies also investing. So the question is really, what is the total amount and where is the money coming from? But Daniel, I mean, you mentioned a lot in the beginning about things you have now really pushed forward, which basically resonates quite a lot with what Cyril brought up. But where do you see as other levers that you would, can say like that, if you would be the government yourself?
Well,
What would you push?
that wouldn't really help, because this is a global and European problem that we're trying to address here. So then I would go to the council and I would say something like, look, we have to do more of circular economy, because many of the problems we're discussing today has to do with resource extraction. That's a very big part of our impact on the planet, is our extraction of resources and the use of it and the disposal of them. So we have to work on the circular economy. And I really liked your indicator, which I like to call specific value. How many euros per kilogram of material that you get out as value for the people. We can call them the economy. What is it worth for us to extract the resource? And I claim that there is a lot to be done, and a lot has been done. We are already getting much more value today than we used to get 10 or 50 or 100 years ago. I'm claiming that some of the French textile companies create much more value from the cotton than what some of the Chinese companies do. It's the same cotton, but or maybe it's a little bit of quality issue there as well. But still, same resource, much more value if you are a little bit smart about it. And Europe is really good at that. So what can we do to raise the specific value of the resource extraction? Well, a few things. First of all, make the products more attractive, more higher quality, more long-lasting. We should use them more. Taxis create higher value than private cars because they're used much more. The service of going around is much higher in a taxi than a car that's parked all the time. We can work on all of these to make sure that we get much higher specific value from the resources we use, meaning that we can reduce our resource consumption while getting much richer and happier and better off, and live long, happy, wealthy, secure lives, which we all want. Now, on a policy, from a policy perspective, how do we do this? Well, I think it's very important that we do not mix up the tools with the goals, the means with the ends. We have to focus on what we're trying to achieve here. In some of the EU legislation, we are picking winners. We are putting indicators on how much we use a certain tool. We have to stop that and focus on what we are trying to achieve. Two examples could be indicator for renewable energy or indicator for organic farming. We're not actually after the renewable energy. We're after stopping climate change, right? And organic farming, we're not after organic farming. We're after using less pesticides and all of the other things that comes with that. So we have to be smarter on that, because that's when we can release innovation, when we stop picking the winners. Because after all, we have to use the three most powerful tools for change that we know of. That's innovation, it's entrepreneurship, and it's free trade. Let those three forces work fully, and we will fix this.
Okay, excellent, clear. Civil society gets the last word, Karin. You see, this was on purpose. So, I mean, what from your perspective, transformative change, what kind of levers do you see we need to actually implement in Europe or in Sweden?
How much time do I have?
You have your 2-3 minutes.
No, but let me start by adding on. In the beginning of your speech, Daniela, I was going to say, well, I agree with you. Then we have some discrepancy in what we think. But when you talked about the need for linking circularity to really tools for resource efficiency, I'm all with you. I think that's really important. Sometimes we talk about circularity on its own, but if you don't combine it with real resource efficiency and long-term strategy, then it's not helping. You can see it in many cases. So resource efficiency, we haven't spoken about energy efficiency here, and I think here we have a lot of things to do. Also in Sweden, we are not at the best as it is. And here it's really important to not think that the necessity to get more energy for electrification is against saying that we need to have energy efficiency when it comes to how we transport ourselves, with how big cars we use, with what kind of buildings we are living in, and so forth. You can both go towards electrification, and then you of course need more energy for that, but at the same time reduce the overall use of energy. So this is really important. And this needs to be done. And this is really part of the transformation that we need to be doing. And in being more resource efficient, we are also being less dependent on the outside world. So this fits together with security as well. Then I think it's important that we talk more about water. I started to work with Stockholm International Water Institute in 2007. And then we didn't speak about water as a problem at all in Sweden. Now we speak about water in Sweden as we used to do about the global picture when I started at CV in 2007. This is interesting. I also think it's really interesting to look at what is happening with the water, and I'm curious about what's happening with the water directive. I'm hearing that it might slide into some omnibus. I'm not sure. That's whispering so far. We see that the national plan for the hydropower has changed. We don't think that is good for the water quality. And then when it comes to biodiversity, I said in the beginning, I would like to say it now, that this is perhaps my greatest concern in Europe, but in Sweden also. And I think it was really important to see the pictures on the financial needs. And I would say, linking it to the necessity to protect, also making it possible for forest owners to protect when they want to, because we don't have the budget now for doing that right now. So financial issues are important when it comes to biodiversity. Also, as you were saying, you are linking to natural resources restorations law. There we can find possibilities for new jobs, for economic growth, if we invest in what needs to be done. So that there is two things at the same time. Investing in something that can create new jobs, new opportunities, at the same time securing the ecosystem for future well-being. So I think that is really important. And then to pick a last thing on agriculture, there is a lot of things that can be done there, also there, if we use less pesticides and less fertilizer. Then we also make ourselves less dependent on, for instance, Russia, that we used to import. And there I don't agree with you, not surprisingly, Daniel. I think it's good to have a target for instance, organic food. And interestingly enough, there was indicators related to the National Food Strategy 1.10, but not in this one. And actually we can see that the use of organic food, the production of organic food is rolling back in Sweden right now. And I do believe that it plays a role if you have political targets for how much. I'm not saying that we should have organic food all over, but I'm saying it's an important tool to showcase how you can have agriculture with less pesticides and less fertilizers.
Excellent. I must say, I mean, there are many things that are in common that we agree upon. There are some things we don't necessarily completely agree upon, but then it would be very boring if we did. So, you know, the innovation, I think, sometimes is also in the areas that are, you know, where we are not really agree on everything. But anyway, I'm sure you said about 1/3 of what you were planning. That's my fault. But anyway, thank you so much, Marie, Daniel, Jytte, and Karin, for providing your insights, but also some of the comments really based on the reports we've heard, and some of the ways forward that we need to consider also. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So let's maybe use a microphone. I would like to invite Leena back on stage as well. And Marie, yes, we can take. You can take. We have one microphone, I think. Otherwise, you can take, or we can share maybe. Yeah, let's share. And it's excellent, you know, because since I'm the moderator, I don't need to summarize. So instead, I can ask people to come up and summarize. No, I'm not going to ask you to do that. I mean, we had a lot of really nice presentations, a good discussion, I would say. But Marie, I mean, maybe some reflections from your side. I mean, you are very much engaged also in European issues. You're following the European debate a lot, not least, of course, the simplification agenda, also from on behalf of the agency, trying to see exactly how this can also impact on us. What are your takeaway sort of thoughts from the discussion and from the presentations?
Thank you. And first of all, I would like to thank you both for very interesting presentations and reflections, very valuable. I will try to summarize a little bit, but of course, as Johan says, it's almost impossible. I think I heard two things in the presentations and in the panel discussion. The first thing was a feeling of distress, of course. It's not, it's not really enjoyable to read everything in the reports, etc. And of course, it leaves you in a feeling of a bit of distress or overwhelm. But more importantly, and the second thing I heard, I think, was a call for creativity. If you want to move forward, you need to be creative. And I think that you all had that in common in the panel too. So we need to be more creative. And I also think that that is something to consider when we listen to the debate on the EU simplification. It's really easy to get stuck in a discussion on simplification versus deregulation. But what I think that this really could be is a call for increased creativity. And of course, then you have to ask the question, how do you get creative? And I heard in the panel discussion, I heard the usual thing that we say when we want to get more creative, try to combine existing knowledge in new ways. And the example of combining security issues with environmental issues is, I think, right on spot. That's a great potential for being more creative. And then, of course, you could also use your imagination and try something that you haven't tried before. So I think that's the basis for creativity, and I think I really heard that in the panel discussion. A reflection from my behalf is that creativity and a feeling of creativity is really important if you want to keep a feeling of agency, so that you can fight the hopelessness and this feeling of distress. So agency is a very different feeling. So even if you're facing very challenging times, if you still can keep a feeling of agency, no matter what your position is, then you will meet the future in challenging times in a more positive way. So that would be my reflection on today's presentations and discussions.
Thank you so much. Leena, what about you? I mean, you heard the sort of reflections from the panel based on the presentations. What is it that you take with you from the discussions here today?
First of all, great panel. I mean, also because you basically almost on all things also were aligned or agreed on many issues. And really, of course, the importance of different actors in the society, civil society, business, of course, the authorities, and politicians. It's so important. Stay the course. I heard that there was strong support for this also the EU-commission's. Let's say basic message now in this second term after the European Green Deal. The goals matter. We also I thought that it was very tempting to indeed link the vision and the narratives that we need also perhaps to change from the more negative narratives and the doomsday scenarios. How can we explain how could the future good life look like? What would it mean in practice for businesses, for citizens, for all actors in our European societies, and of course also globally? And there we still lack means of how can we make it tangible and attractive. Because indeed there are other forces also in play, like what we heard about the disinformation or, let's say, machinated campaigns. The importance of regulations. I mean, I took it also as very, EU is famous of regulating, that's the best we can do, but also how important, of course, it is, even for the business. I mean, in order to work in the single market. And that is such a superpower that we have harmonized legislation which allows goods and services to move around. So really valuing that, which is now so often questioned, and omnibus sometimes seems as attacking exactly that strength. But also the importance of targets. And yes, what you measure, you treasure. So of course the targets hopefully are the right ones. And this of course then brings that we also hopefully can monitor the progress towards the targets also in the future. And just want to also point the importance of the work of, for example, Naturvårdsverket. So the data and reporting, having credible data is definitely also important in the future. Reaching out to, back to the narratives and vision, how do we reach out and raise awareness in all parts of the society, among citizens as well? How can we really also bring to not only to the problems but to the solutions? So these are not easy issues, and of course somebody had to say money and investment and the investment gap that we have, but on the other hand the cost of inaction. These are also things that we in the European Environment Agency work more and more now together with our partners, so that we can put value, I mean monetized value on the both cost of inaction but also the benefits of action. So all really important issues, but really difficult to summarize, so don't expect that.
I know, and it was more your reflections, I would say, rather than a summary. Leena, can you say maybe something about the work ahead for the European Environment Agency? I mean, you have presented this report. Of course, you have an ongoing work. Can you say a few words? What is it that you see working ahead now in the next couple of years? When do we expect the next report? What do you see as the key things for you as an agency to really push forward on right now?
Every year we, of course, publish several reports, thematic, but also these more general ones. We published, 1.5 years ago, the first European climate risk assessment, which really, got to the headlines, because it was first time really illustrating what do we have ahead of us in Europe, which is the fastest warming continent. And also now we are working on the second edition. It's only due in 28 autumn on request of the Commission. But we will now also try to make it even more comprehensive, because there were risks that had to be scoped out from that first report. So really look at that. It will be before our next 5-year report anyway. Next year is a big nature year. So now the reporting and data that the countries have been submitting to us will be analyzed. And then we try to then publish the latest data and takeaways from the state of nature, state of seas as well. So that's another flagship report next year. But all in all, of course, we try to also have more dynamic data published on so that those who can and know what there is, or more dynamically updated data, for example, on air quality, where we have a lot of data, we could have it more accessible to those who need and want to use it. These are big things, and of course, indeed, when we come to the next state of Europe's environment and climate question, do we wait for 5 years? Do we need to do it a bit earlier, also because of the debate and changes in the policy cycle, or do we move actually indeed more dynamic reporting on the state and outlook?
So more gradually, for instance, being able to follow what is happening rather than maybe a 5-year big assessment.
And digitalization, using the modern technologies, of course, also very important, not only for the reporting and monitoring, this good simplification, but also how we can make it accessible more readily.
Excellent, thank you so much. Marie, any final comment from your side before we close the seminar, because it's approaching 1:15, and I think that people feel that it's time to go home in the beautiful sunny Stockholm weather.
Yes, thank you to you, Johan.
You're okay. Okay, so thank you so much. You have also been a very patient audience. There are so many things to discuss around this. This is not the last time, Leena, we will invite you to Sweden We look forward to bring you back, and also, of course, the Commission. You're always welcome also. And it's great to be able then to be in this beautiful environment at the Europe House here in Stockholm. Thank you for the presentations, really excellent. Thank you to all the panelists that you were sharing your wisdom. And thanks you also for some of the conclusions that you made here. Well, the debate will continue, and the questions that we are working on, environmental issues, are more important than ever. And we have to reach out. We have to reach out also to all those people who are not in this room, because there are quite few of them as well that we have addressed today, that they are out there but maybe not engaged in the discussions. So thank you very much, and thank you also for hosting us here today. We appreciate that very much, Annika. So a big applause to everyone who has participated.